So, my name is Cammie. I'm with the Free Press at the University of Southern Maine. So, it looks like you're coming up to Portland for a show in June. That must be exciting. Have you ever been to Maine before?
I have, yeah. I love Portland, Maine.
So, how did you get your start doing comedy and stuff?
I started very young. I was in school actually, and I started in high school, and then when I went to college, I kind of infiltrated this student activities board that was bringing in comedians, and I just persuaded them to bring comics I liked, and then was like, "Can I open for them?" And they were like, "Open for them," and you know, I just started doing stand up in New York, so I I was getting on stage. I had tapes from they were called bringer shows. You had to bring your friends, but those friends laughed really hard. So you're like, oh, I look pretty good here. So they let me open for this comic Dat Fan, who they brought, who won the first last comic standing. It's like 500 Asian kids, hot crowd. They were great. I killed, and they were like, all right, you can open for whoever we bring. And I talked them into bringing Bill Burr, so that was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I weirdly enough, I think I was on Conan with him like 10 years later. So that was a weird, or maybe something like that. And he was like, "You look familiar," and I was like, "You don't remember me?" And he was like, "All right," but so that's kind of where I got my start is bringing in those comics, and you hand out flyers in the city, and you find ways to get on stage.
So, during the pandemic, you had to climb up on roofs and do it that way too. How'd you figure out that loophole to get your craft going again?
Well, I didn't crack the roof thing. It was other people would have shows on roofs, and then they would give me 10 minutes of stage time, and I'm the type of comic that wants to do a ton of sets a night. Some people think it's a waste of time, but it makes me feel like I'm just in comedy shape. So I can tweak jokes. I can try to. I and also when I get really sick of jokes and keep telling them, then I'm like, all right, I have to write a new joke. I hate this joke now. So that forces me to turn over material. So I also like getting to the jokes to the point where it's like second nature. You don't have to think about the joke. You just say it, and that way you can focus on the room to see if anything can be used into it. So it keeps me kind of it keeps me engaged. And I thought, well, if I could do these shows that are, if I can do 50 minutes or an hour, my own show, I would be growing so much more. Like I can't just do a 10-minute spot every couple nights. I'm going crazy as it is. So I figured go to Instagram, put in my stories. If you got a roof and some friends, people are looking for stuff to do. And at that time, people were still wearing masks outside. I mean, it's crazy to think about. And I was like, is this ethical what I'm doing? That's how, it was a pretty crazy time. So yeah, climbing rooftops and fire escapes to do jokes. I remember reading there was this book about ancient Jewish settlers, and they talked about how difficult the winters were and how music got people through the winters, and that kept people together. And I was like, man, maybe I could do that with comedy. Is like people are pretty sad right now. Maybe I could make people laugh, and I'm selfishly getting a lot out of it as well. So.
That's awesome. In terms of shows that you've been on, you've been all over the place with Comedy Central, The Late Show, Late Late Show, all that stuff. That's which was your favorite that you've been on? Like what was the most crazy experience that you're like, I can't believe I've made it to this point?
I mean, the Letterman one was pretty crazy because it's David Letterman and he's just such an icon. And he was so nice. I think I caught him at the right time. Where if I was on that show, maybe, 10 years ago or something, and he'd been doing it for that long and doing that many shows a week, he wouldn't have put maybe the effort into knowing my work that he put in for this show. And he told me he watched the rooftop thing. And for David Letterman to call you resourceful, I mean, it's like pretty crazy. So, uh, that was pretty cool, and I feel like it went well, and I feel like they cut it in a way that I liked it. We did 2 interviews, and I think they even cut jokes. I'm like, "Well, that was a pretty funny joke they cut, but I'm fine with how it came out, so I guess I'll just keep telling that joke," you know? Uh, but I felt that he did a good combo of kinda teeing me up with questions that I figured he would ask me, and then questions that I didn't think he'd ask me. So I think that combo, like, it was a good combo of me having some stuff to talk about, but also kept me on my toes a little.
And now you have your own Netflix show going, the same time tomorrow. What was that like getting your own Netflix thing?
It's the funny thing about this is, obviously you're like, "Oh my god, Netflix," but at the same time, I've been doing comedy for so long that when you get stuff in this business, you're so beaten down that you don't really celebrate. You're just like, "Yeah, yeah, it's about time, I guess." It was really cool to get that, and it was really nice to be exposed to a whole new fan base, with Netflix's reach. The YouTube one was pretty thrilling though, because that was I had to make that myself, and I think the rejection of doing I Got This, which was the first YouTube one I did, and it took off like it did. That was probably the most thrilling special I've ever done because I was so hungry and had a chip on my shoulder, and but same time tomorrow was great, and that's the first. I did a half hour special in Boston for Comedy Central back in like 2015, but other than that, it's the first one I've done anywhere but New York, and Chicago is great. So that was a great. Midwest crowds are really great, and I love Chicago.
And you got some podcasts. You have your Names with Games with Julian Edelman. Speaking of New England, the Patriots. Love the man.
Yeah, as
That's
an athlete, I always hated him. That was the weird thing is it was like a hate respect thing the way I look at like Paul Pierce. Where I'm like, I know
oh
he's
yeah.
great, but this guy. That's how I always
Mhm.
thought of him. And then of course you meet the guy and you end up realizing like, man, what a good. I mean, I of course respected the way he played. He was such a tough player, and but like as a Giant fan, I always hated the
Mhm.
Patriots, and but like you can't really hate guys like Brady or Edelman because they seem like, and I know Edelman's a great guy, but Brady seems like a good guy too. So it gets frustrating that they have this amazing dynasty in almost every sport. Boston's been crushing it, so that's frustrating as a New York fan. But you know, I think they wanted that New York Boston beef, and it's friendly and it's fun. I think
Yeah.
people feel that with the show, so he has actual insight to what it's like to the preparation and what it's like to be a pro athlete, and I can tell him what it's like to write a pretty good joke. So it's a good combo.
How did you get into doing the sports podcast?
I mean, I think they were looking for someone who could talk sports, who but wasn't like a sports expert. They wanted, I think, it to be a little livelier than just an X's and O's guy. And I had hosted a sports show on MSG, the Knicks and Rangers Network, years ago, and ran a couple seasons. And it's a small local network, but I thought we did a pretty good job with it. And I think they maybe had heard, oh, Sam knows sports and he can hang with you, and Julian's expertise in football. I'm pretty good talking basketball, and then we both don't really know hockey, so we kind of have to do our homework with that. Baseball we're probably even on, and then there's all kinds of if we have a guest that we don't know a ton about, we have to do our homework.
And then your We Might Be Drunk podcast and the whiskey that you came out with. That's cool.
That's pretty crazy, right? I mean, that's a fun pod. That's gonna take years off my life, so I hope people enjoy it. There's definitely days on like a Tuesday afternoon where I'm like, "Do we need to get drunk?" And he's like, "I don't know." So we try to pace ourselves, not just for us, but also for the listeners. Because, but I do get messages sometimes like, "You weren't even that drunk in that last episode." I'm like, "Is that like a necessity? I have to like you want me to be slurring?" People do that at shows. I was just in San Diego, and I'm in a restaurant before the shows, and I 3 different people sent me tequila shots, and I'm like, "Do you want the show to suck?" I'm like, "I'm pacing myself for you guys."
You already talked about how you kind of like turn over your material, like if you get sick of a joke or depending on the crowd, but how does it change like doing jokes over a podcast versus a stand-up set like in person?
Well, the pod, we don't really prep all that much, it's and we have interview questions if someone's coming on, but we also don't want it to feel like an interview, so it's more like a hangout, and if it's someone we don't know as well, it will feel more like an interview, and I don't think people like that as much. Whereas a stand-up, it's I'm a writer for stand-up. I write all my jokes and I test them and you hone them and you're like, does this word choice? I can get as anal at that as like, oh, this was one too many syllables, or you try to really give it a lot of attention to every word. But then at the same time, you want it to sound conversational. So uh, a joke that works on a comedy stage would not necessarily work on a podcast. It would sometimes feel too scripted, but you kind of lull them into a rhythm. I think the same way you're lulled into a rhythm when maybe you watch a foreign film and subtitled at first, you're like, "Can I do this?" And then you or even like a movie from like the '50s where they speak differently. I think sometimes it takes a minute, but then once you're in, you have them, and they've kinda hopefully given themselves to that different rhythm.
So, is there anything else you want to like talk about, add while we have you here?
I mean, I'm excited for Portland, Maine. It's been a while. I think I played that theater a few years ago, opening for Aziz. So I remember how beautiful it is, and it's great. I mean, I'm pumped to do a few more Northeast shows. This is like the only part of Northeast I haven't really hit this year, so I'm excited.